He looked her dead in the eye at the altar and whispered, "Don't get any ideas, Tesoro. This marriage is a grave, not a bed." Dominic Moretti was the ruthless king of Chicago, a man who viewed love as a weakness and his new wife, Serafina, as nothing more than a glorified peace treaty. But he made one fatal calculation. He assumed he was the only dangerous thing in the room. What happens when a cold-blooded contract meets a honeymoon designed for sin? You're about to find out. This is the story of how the Mafia's coldest heart lost total control. Buckle up. The air inside St. Patrick's Cathedral was not filled with the scent of lilies or joy. It smelled of beeswax, old money, and impending violence. Dominic Moretti stood at the altar, his posture as rigid as the marble columns supporting the vaulted ceiling. He checked the time on his Patek Philippe, a custom piece, platinum, with a calm blue face that belied the storm raging behind his eyes. 2:03 p.m. She was late. "She's testing you, Dom," whispered Enzo, his underboss and best man, leaning in slightly. Enzo's hand hovered near the opening of his tuxedo jacket, where a compact Glock 19 rested against his ribs. In their world, weddings were just high-stakes business meetings where the targets were stationary. "Let her test," Dominic replied, his voice a low rumble that didn't carry past the first pew. "Once the ink is dry, the testing stops." Dominic didn't want this. He didn't want a wife, and he certainly didn't want Serafina Russo. The Russos were old blood, yes, descendants of the Sicilian hardliners who founded the commission, but they were fading. Their territory in New Jersey was bleeding cash, and their political connections were rotting. But Dominic's father, the Don of the Chicago outfit, saw value in their shipping lanes. So a trade was made, cash and protection for the Russos, a legitimate lineage and East Coast access for the Morettis, and Serafina was the receipt. The heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral groaned open. A collective hush fell over the 300 guests, capos, politicians, corrupt judges, and the terrified legitimate relatives who had no idea who they were truly rubbing elbows with. Serafina Russo stepped into the light. Dominic narrowed his eyes. He had expected a cowering girl. He had read the file. 23 years old, art history degree from Columbia, kept sheltered by her father, seemingly soft. But the woman walking down the aisle didn't look soft. She wore a dress by Vera Wang that must have cost more than most people's homes, lace sleeves, a plunging back, and a train that looked like a pool of spilled milk. But it was her face that caught him. Her chin was tilted up. Her eyes, dark as espresso, locked onto his immediately. There was no fear. There was resentment, yes. Fury, perhaps, but not fear. As she reached the altar, her father, a wheezing man named Carlo with yellowed eyes, placed her hand in Dominic's. Dominic's grip was firm, almost bruising. "Take care of her, Moretti," Carlo wheezed. "I take care of what's mine," Dominic said, though he didn't look at the old man. He looked at Serafina. The priest began the rites, droning on about sanctity and eternal bonds. It was laughable. Dominic leaned in close to her ear, the movement looking intimate to the pews, but feeling predatory up close. "Smile, Serafina," he murmured. "The cameras are on the left." "I'm not an actress, Dominic," she whispered back, her voice steady. "And you're not a director." "Today I am," he countered. "Listen to me closely. You are here to look pretty, nod at the right times, and bear my name. That is the extent of your utility." She stiffened, her fingers trembling slightly in his grip. Not from nerves, he realized, but from suppressed rage. "And what about you?" she shot back, keeping her eyes forward. "What is your utility? Being a brute in a tailored suit?" "My utility is keeping your father's head attached to his neck," Dominic said coldly. The priest asked for the rings. Dominic slid a heavy diamond, 4 carats, emerald cut, flawless clarity, onto her finger. It felt like a shackle. She slid a plain gold band onto his. As the priest pronounced them man and wife, Dominic lifted her veil. Up close, he smelled her perfume, jasmine, and something sharper, like pink peppercorns. It was intoxicating, irritatingly so. He leaned in for the kiss. It was meant to be a show for the families. He pressed his lips to hers, expecting cold compliance. Instead, her lips were warm, and for a split second, she pressed back, a silent challenge. I am here. I exist. He pulled away abruptly, his eyes darkening. He gripped her waist, perhaps a little too tightly, and guided her toward the exit. Don't get any ideas, Tesoro, he said, loud enough only for her. This marriage means nothing. It's a grave, not a bed. Once we return from this farce of a honeymoon, you stay in your wing. I stay in mine. Serafina smoothed the front of her dress, her expression turning into a mask of ice. A grave implies peace, Dominic. I have a feeling you won't find any of that with me. They walked out into the blinding sunlight of Fifth Avenue, greeted by a storm of paparazzi flashes. They smiled the smiles of sharks, hand in hand, already at war. The reception was held at the Pierre. The ballroom was a sea of crystal chandeliers and floral arrangements that cost a fortune, white roses, hydrangeas, and imported orchids. The wedding of the decade, the press called it. The merger of the century, the FBI agents parked in the van down the street called it. Serafina sat at the head table, dissecting her lobster thermidor without eating a bite. She felt like a doll in a glass box. Every time she looked up, she saw men whispering, men with scars, men with bulging waistbands, men who looked at her not as a person, but as an asset acquired in a takeover. You're not eating, Dominic said. He was swirling a glass of Barolo, watching the room more than he was watching her. I lose my appetite when I'm being sold, she replied, taking a sip of water. You weren't sold. You were leveraged, Dominic corrected, his tone dry. Eat. If you faint, it makes me look incompetent. God forbid you look incompetent, Dominic. Better to be a monster than a failure, right? He turned to her then, his jaw tight. Careful, Sarah. You don't know who's listening. I don't care, she snapped, her voice rising slightly. You think because you put a ring on my finger, you own my voice? My father might have been afraid of your Chicago muscle, but I grew up watching men like you posture and preen. You're all the same. Dominic's hand shot out under the table, gripping her thigh. It wasn't sexual. It was a warning. His grip was steel. I am nothing like the men you know. The men you know are sloppy. They let emotion dictate their moves. I am precise. And right now, my precise calculation is that you need to shut up and smile at the don of the Genovese family approaching the table. Serafina forced a smile as a heavy-set man approached, offering congratulations that sounded more like threats. She played the part. She nodded. She laughed at the bad jokes. But inside she was plotting. She had a separate bank account her father didn't know about. She had a passport hidden in the lining of her suitcase. The plan was simple. Survive the honeymoon, return to New York, and disappear during a shopping trip. She just had to endure 2 weeks alone with Dominic Moretti. Around midnight, the signal was given. It was time to leave. They were ushered into a black armored SUV. The destination, Teterboro Airport, where Dominic's Gulfstream G650 waited. Where are we going? Serafina asked, as the car merged onto the highway. She kicked off her heels, rubbing her aching arches. Ravello, Dominic said, typing on his encrypted phone. Private estate, secluded, secure. Secure from who? Everyone. The flight was silent. Dominic worked the entire time, reviewing ledgers and making satellite calls. Serafina slept, or pretended to, curled up in the leather seat. She watched him through half-closed eyelashes. He was undeniably handsome. Sharp jaw, hair black as ink, shoulders that filled out his dress shirt. But he was cold. A machine. They landed in Naples at sunrise and took a helicopter to the Amalfi coast, landing on a private helipad jutting out over the Tyrrhenian Sea. The estate was breathtaking, a 17th-century villa clinging to the cliffs, surrounded by lemon groves and high stone walls. The staff was waiting. A butler, a chef, and 4 security guards who looked like they were carved out of granite. "Welcome, Mr. Moretti. Mrs. Moretti," the butler said. Mrs. Moretti. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. They were shown to the master suite. It was expansive, with a balcony overlooking the azure sea. But there was only one bed. A California king with sheets of Egyptian cotton. Dominic walked in, tossed his jacket on a chair, and began undoing his cufflinks. "I'll take the guest room," Serafina said immediately, clutching her purse. Dominic paused, looking at her in the mirror. "There is no guest room prepared. The security protocols require us to be in the hardened wing of the villa. This is the hardened wing." "I am not sleeping in that bed with you," she stated. "Then sleep on the floor." "I don't care," Dominic said, unbuttoning his shirt. He revealed a torso mapped with scars, bullet wounds, knife slashes, the history of his violence written on his skin. Serafina's breath hitched. She hadn't realized how physical his life truly was. He turned to face her, shirt open. "But understand this, Serafina. We are here to maintain an image. The staff talks. If they see us sleeping in separate rooms on our honeymoon, word gets back to New York. If word gets back that there is trouble in paradise, the alliance looks weak. If the alliance looks weak, people die, maybe even your father." He walked past her into the bathroom. "Get changed. We have dinner in an hour. And wear the red dress I had packed for you." "You packed for me?" she asked, incredulous. "I control the variables, Sarah. You are a variable." He shut the door. Serafina stood alone in the center of the most beautiful room she had ever seen, feeling like a prisoner. She walked to the balcony and looked down at the jagged rocks hundreds of feet below. "Variables can change," she whispered to the wind, "and variables can explode." She went to the closet. She found the red dress. It was silk, backless, and scandalous. She put it on, not for him, but for herself. If she was going to be a prisoner, she would be the queen of the prison. When she walked out to the terrace for dinner, Dominic was waiting. He had changed into a casual linen shirt and slacks, looking devastatingly relaxed. He looked up as she approached, and for the first time since the altar, his composure faltered. His hand paused on his wine glass. His eyes swept over her, lingering on the curve of her hips, the exposé of her back. This marriage means nothing. Mantra was about to be tested by basic biology. "Sit," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Pour me a drink, Dominic," she commanded, sitting down and crossing her legs. "If I have to look at you, I need wine." He stared at her for a long beat. Then the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Careful, Mrs. Moretti," he said, pouring a vintage Brunello. "You might find that you enjoy the view eventually. Don't hold your breath." The honeymoon had begun, and the air was already thick enough to choke on. For the first 3 days, the Villa Simbrone might as well have been a monastery. Dominic spent his mornings locked in the study, a room lined with mahogany and smelling of lemon oil, conducting video conferences with his captains back in Chicago. He managed the heroin trade coming through the ports of Gary, Indiana, and authorized union strikes in construction sectors with the detachment of a stockbroker moving shares. Serafina, conversely, spent her time testing the perimeter. She was a ghost in the house. She wore the silk robes provided by the staff, drifting from room to room, ignoring Dominic whenever their paths crossed. But beneath the silence, she was calculating. On the fourth morning, the silence broke. Dominic was on the terrace, reading a dossier on a rival syndicate, the Bratva, encroaching on his north side territory. He took a sip of his espresso, black, no sugar, when a shadow fell over his table. "I'm going to Positano," Serafina announced. Dominic didn't look up. "No, you're not. I need things. Personal things," she lied. "Make a list. Marco will get them." "I am not sending your bodyguard to buy me tampons and face cream, Dominic. It's humiliating." Dominic finally looked up. He set the dossier down slowly. He was wearing dark aviators, hiding his eyes, but the set of his jaw was warning enough. "You are not leaving this estate. The security situation is fluid." "Fluid?" Serafina scoffed, leaning her hands on the table. "You mean you have enemies? That's your problem, not mine. I am suffocating here. I need to walk. I need to see people who aren't carrying concealed weapons. You married into the life, Serafina. My enemies are now your enemies. If you walk into Positano alone, you are a walking kidnap ransom. 10 million, easy. Maybe 20 if they know how much I hate losing property." "Is that all I am? Property? Until you prove otherwise?" "Yes." Serafina grabbed his espresso cup and poured the hot liquid onto the pristine, white limestone patio. The dark stain spread like ink. "I'm going," she said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "Stop me if you want, but you'll have to tie me up." She turned and marched toward the main gate. Dominic watched her go, a muscle feathering in his jaw. He tapped his earpiece. "Enzo, prepare the boat and get the security detail ready. We're going to Positano." He stood up, adjusting his linen jacket to cover the holster at the small of his back. He caught up to her at the heavy iron gates, where 2 guards were hesitating, unsure whether to physically restrain their boss's new wife. "Get in the car," Dominic ordered, pointing to the vintage Alfa Romeo Spider, cherry red, parked in the driveway. It wasn't the armored SUV. It was a concession. Serafina paused. "I drive." "Absolutely not. I drive, or I scream until the carabinieri down the road come to investigate the noise." Dominic stared at her. Most people who threatened him ended up in the foundation of a high-rise. But looking at her, hair wild from the humidity, eyes blazing, he felt a strange flicker of amusement. "Fine." He tossed her the keys. "But if you scratch it, I deduct it from your father's protection budget." The drive down the winding cliffside roads of the Amalfi coast was terrifying. Serafina drove like a woman with nothing to lose, taking the hairpin turns at speeds that made the tires scream. Dominic sat in the passenger seat, one hand gripping the door handle, the other resting casually near his waistband. He didn't flinch, even when she drifted dangerously close to the guardrail that separated them from a 300-foot drop to the sea. "You have a death wish, Tesoro?" he asked over the roar of the wind. "Maybe I just want to see if you have a fear response," she shouted back, downshifting aggressively. "I had my fear response burned out of me when I was 12, he said, his voice flat. They arrived in Positano alive, though the Alpha's brakes smelled hot. The town was a cascade of pastel houses tumbling down to the sea. Dominic signaled to his security team, 4 men in plain clothes who had followed in a Land Rover, to keep a middle distance. "Go shop," Dominic said, putting on his sunglasses. "I'll be right behind you." For 2 hours they played a strange game. Serafina went into high-end boutiques, Missoni, Dolce and Gabbana, local linen shops. Dominic stood by the doors, leaning against the frames, looking like a bored husband. But his eyes were constantly scanning. He watched the rooftops, the shadows in the alleyways, the hands of the tourists. He watched her, too. He watched how she touched the fabrics, how she smiled at the shop assistants, a genuine warm smile he had never received. He saw the way other men looked at her. Italian men were not subtle. They stared. A waiter at a cafe winked at her as she walked by. Dominic stopped. He stared at the waiter until the man turned pale and dropped his tray of glasses. "You're scaring the locals," Serafina muttered as he caught up to her. "He was looking at you with disrespect. He was looking at me like a woman. You look at me like a liability." "You are both," Dominic grunted. They stopped for lunch at Le Cyrenus, a hotel with a terrace that offered the best view of the coast. They sat at a corner table. Dominic ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon, 2008 vintage. "Celebrating?" she asked archly. "Surviving your driving," he replied. The alcohol and the sun softened the edges of their hostility. They ate fresh burrata and tomatoes that tasted like sunshine. "Why did you agree to it?" Serafina asked suddenly, breaking the truce. "The marriage. You're Dominic Moretti. You could have taken my father's territory by force. You didn't need to marry me." Dominic swirled his champagne. "War is expensive, Serafina. Bullets cost money. Funerals cost money. Bribing judges costs money. Marriage? Marriage is cheap. It buys stability. So I was the discount option." "You were the smart option," he corrected. His eyes locked onto hers. "And when I saw the photos, I didn't hate the idea." Serafina felt a blush rise up her neck, which infuriated her. "Don't try to charm me, Dominic. I know who you are. I read the papers. The union leader in Chicago who fell off his balcony. The reporter who disappeared." Dominic's expression went cold instantly. The charm evaporated. "Don't believe everything you read, and don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. I want to know who I'm sleeping next to, or, well, sleeping down the hall from." Dominic leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. "You are sleeping next to the man who keeps the wolves away, Serafina. You might think I'm the monster, but you have no idea what is waiting in the dark outside of my protection. The Chicago underworld is a slaughterhouse. I am the butcher who keeps order. If I am ruthless, it is because I have to be." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline. The touch was electric. Serafina stopped breathing. "And right now," he murmured, his thumb brushing her lower lip, "my utility is keeping you safe. Even from yourself." For a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded. There was only the heat of his hand and the dark pull of his eyes. Serafina felt a dangerous tug in her chest, not fear, but gravitation. Then Dominic's eyes shifted. He looked past her, over her shoulder, toward the entrance of the terrace. His pupil dilated. The predator was back. "Don't look," he said, his voice changing from seductive to steel in a microsecond. "Smile, pick up your glass, but get ready to move." "Dominic?" 2 men. 3 o'clock, wearing heavy jackets. It's 80 degrees out. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs. "Who are they?" "Not friends." Dominic stood up, buttoning his jacket. "We're leaving. Now." The walk to the car was a masterclass in controlled panic. Dominic steered her with a hand on the small of her back, his grip iron hard. He didn't run, but his stride was long and urgent. "Enzo, bring the car around. Front entrance." "Now," Dominic spoke into his lapel. "Target acquiring." Enzo's voice crackled in his ear. "Boss, we have multiple bogies. It's a setup." As they stepped out onto the cobblestone street, the world exploded into chaos. A black motorbike screeched around the corner, mounting the sidewalk. The rider raised a submachine gun, an Uzi. "Down!" Dominic roared. He didn't duck for cover himself. Instead, he threw his body over Serafina, slamming her into the recess of a stone doorway. The air split with the sound of gunfire. Pop, 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 pop. Bullets chipped the stone inches from Dominic's head. Dust and debris rained down on them. Serafina screamed, covering her head. She felt Dominic flinch, a sharp, violent jerk. But he didn't move off her. He was a human shield, heavy and warm and solid. Dominic drew his weapon, a custom staccato 2011. He spun out from the doorway, firing 3 controlled shots. Bang, bang, bang. The motorcyclist jerked back, the bike skidding sideways and crashing into a flower stand. "Move!" Dominic grabbed her hand. They ran. The idyllic tourist town had turned into a war zone. Tourists were screaming, overturning tables. Enzo and the security team were engaging a second group of attackers down the street. "My car!" Dominic shouted. The Alfa Romeo was blocked. "Forget it! The alleyway!" He dragged her into a narrow, winding alley that smelled of laundry and stale wine. They sprinted up the steep steps. Serafina's sandals slipped. She kicked them off and ran barefoot, the stone tearing at her skin. They reached a dead end, a high stone wall. "Damn it!" Dominic hissed. He looked at Serafina. Her dress was torn, her feet bleeding, her face pale with shock. But she wasn't crying. She was looking for a way out. "Dominic, the trellis!" She pointed. Heavy wisteria vines climbed the wall. "Go! Climb!" he ordered. He turned back toward the alley entrance, gun raised. "I'll hold them." "I'm not leaving you!" she yelled. He looked at her, truly looked at her, with a mixture of fury and awe. "Go, Serafina. If they take you, they will use you to break me. Do not let them break me." That sentence hit her harder than a bullet. He wasn't protecting his asset. He was protecting his weakness. She scrambled up the vines, her fingernails breaking against the stone. She made it to the top and looked down. 3 men were rushing at the alley. Dominic didn't hesitate. He fired, took cover behind a dumpster, and fired again. He was efficient, brutal. He shot the first man in the knee, the second in the chest. But the third man had a clear shot. "Dominic! Behind the crate!" Serafina screamed from the wall. Dominic didn't question her. He dove left. A shotgun blast obliterated the spot where he had been standing a second before. He rolled, came up on one knee, and put a bullet between the attacker's eyes. Silence fell over the alley, broken only by the distant sirens of the carabinieri. Dominic looked up at the wall. He was breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face, blood staining the white shoulder of his linen shirt. "Get down here," he growled. She climbed down. As soon as her feet hit the ground, he grabbed her. He didn't hug her gently. He crushed her against him, burying his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her fear and her life. "You foolish, stubborn woman," he whispered against her skin. "You saved my life." "You saved mine first," she panted, her hands clutching the back of his shirt. She felt the wetness. She pulled her hand back. It was covered in red. "Dominic, you're hit." "Grazed. It's nothing." Enzo's SUV screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. "Boss, get in." The ride back to the villa was silent, but the air in the car had changed. The tension was no longer cold hostility. It was hot, electric, volatile. Dominic sat with his head back, eyes closed, a towel pressed to his shoulder. Serafina sat beside him, watching his chest rise and fall, realizing that the man she had vowed to hate was the only reason she was breathing. When they got to the villa, Dominic waved off the doctor. "I can stitch it. It went through the fleshy part of the deltoid. Just get the kit." "I'll do it," Serafina said. Dominic opened his eyes. "You'll faint." I just watched you kill 3 men, Dominic. I think I can handle a needle." He stared at her, then nodded slowly. In the master bathroom, under the harsh light of the vanity, Dominic stripped off his bloody shirt. His body was a masterpiece of violence, but Serafina focused on the wound. It was ugly, but clean. She cleaned it with iodine. He didn't flinch. She threaded the suture needle. "This will hurt," she said. "Do it." As she stitched him up, her hands were steady. She could feel the heat radiating off him. He watched her face, tracking every micro-expression. The adrenaline from the shootout hadn't faded. It had mutated into something else. When she tied the final knot and snipped the thread, she looked up. They were inches apart. "Who were they?" she asked softly. "Russians, hired by a rival in New York." "Why?" "Because they knew I was on my honeymoon. They thought I would be distracted." Dominic's eyes dropped to her lips. "They were right." Serafina's breath hitched. "I'm a distraction." "You are a consuming fire, Serafina." He reached out with his good arm, his hand gripping the back of her neck. The restraint snapped. The grave opened up. He kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss at the altar. This was savage. It tasted of copper and iodine and desperation. It was a kiss that claimed, a kiss that devoured. Serafina didn't pull away. She made a sound in the back of her throat, a whimper of surrender, and pressed her body against his. Dominic groaned, sweeping everything off the marble vanity. Bottles of cologne, razors, lotions clattering to the floor. He lifted her onto the counter, stepping between her legs. "I tried," he rasped, trailing kisses down her throat, biting lightly at her pulse point. "I tried to keep you at arm's length, but you are inevitable." "Then stop fighting," she whispered, her hands tangling in his dark hair. "Stop fighting me, Dominic." "I'm done fighting you," he said, looking her in the eyes with an intensity that burned. "Now, I'm just going to own you." He ripped the delicate fabric of her ruined dress. There was no going back. The contract was null and void. The honeymoon had officially begun, and Dominic Moretti was about to prove exactly why he was the most dangerous man in Chicago, and the only man who could handle the fire of Serafina Russo. The sun over the Tyrrhenian Sea rose like a bruised peach, casting a pale, unforgiving light into the master suite of Villa Timbrone. Serafina woke slowly, her body aching in a way that was entirely new to her. The soreness wasn't from the run down the alleyway or the climb up the trellis, though her muscles protested those too. It was a deeper ache, a phantom imprint of Dominic's weight, his hands, his mouth. She reached across the massive bed. The sheets were cold. Panic, sharp and immediate, spiked in her chest. She sat up, clutching the duvet to her chest, her eyes darting around the room. The memories of the gunfire in Positano crashed back into her mind. The Russians, the blood on Dominic's shoulder. "I'm here." The voice came from the balcony doors. Dominic was leaning against the frame, fully dressed in black trousers and a fresh white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his forearms. His left arm was stiff, but he held a cigarette in his right hand, the smoke curling lazily into the morning air. He looked different. The cold, corporate mask he had worn at the altar was gone. In its place was something darker, heavier, yet infinitely more open. He looked like a man who had claimed territory and was now calculating the cost of defending it. Serafina swung her legs out of bed, ignoring her nudity as she grabbed a silk robe. She walked to him. "You should be resting," she said, her eyes scanning the bandage visible beneath the thin fabric of his shirt. "Rest is for the dead, Tesoro," Dominic murmured, taking a drag. He exhaled, turning his head to look at her. His gaze was possessive. sweeping over her with a heat that made her knees weak. "And thanks to you, I'm not dead. Did you sleep?" "No." He crushed the cigarette out in a crystal ashtray. "Enzo and I have been debriefing." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. In Dominic's world, debriefing usually involved a basement, a chair, and a set of pliers. "The men who attacked us?" Serafina asked, stepping closer until she was standing between his spread legs. She placed a hand on his chest, feeling the steady, powerful thrum of his heart. "Who sent them?" "You said a rival in New York." Dominic covered her hand with his. His skin was rough, calloused from years of handling weapons. "We interrogated the driver. He sang before we even opened the toolbox. It was the Bratva, yes. But they didn't act alone. They were given our itinerary. Someone told them exactly where we would be, down to the reservation at Le Cyrenus." Serafina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning breeze. "A leak? Inside your organization?" "No," Dominic said, his eyes hardening into flint. "My team is impenetrable. Enzo would die before he whispered a word. The leak came from the outside, from the only other people who knew the details of the wedding transfer." He paused, looking at her with a strange expression, pity mixed with rage. "Who, Dominic?" "We'll discuss it when we are back in Chicago. The plane is fueled. We leave in an hour." "I'm not a child, Dominic. Don't protect me from the truth." He grabbed her chin, tilting her face up. "I am not protecting you from the truth, Serafina. I am protecting you from the heartbreak. Because once you know, there is no going back, and I want you to have one last hour of peace before we go back to war." He kissed her then, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of espresso and tobacco. It was a promise and an apology wrapped in one. The flight back to the States was a stark contrast to the flight out. There was no silence. They sat facing each other in the cream leather seats of the Gulf Stream. Dominic worked on his laptop, but his hand rested constantly on her knee, a grounding point. Serafina cleaned her gun. Dominic had given it to her before they boarded, a compact Sig Sauer P. Real 65. "You know how to use this?" he had asked. "My father taught me to shoot clay pigeons at the club," she had replied. "Clay pigeons don't shoot back. Aim for center mass. Double tap. Don't hesitate." Now, as she wiped the slide with a cloth, she looked at him. "You're worried about what happens when we land." Dominic didn't look up from the screen. "Chicago is in chaos. The attack in Italy was a signal. The sharks smell blood. They think I'm wounded. They think I'm distracted by a new wife. I need to remind them that I am the apex predator." "How will you do that?" Dominic closed the laptop. The look in his eyes was terrifying. "By public execution." They landed at O'Hare Private Terminal at dusk. The sky was a bruised purple, the wind biting and cold, a sharp change from the lemon-scented warmth of Amalfi. A convoy of 3 black Cadillac Escalades waited on the tarmac. This wasn't a wedding procession. It was a military extraction. Men with earpieces and assault rifles under their trench coats surrounded the plane steps. "Welcome home, boss," Enzo said, opening the door. He nodded to Serafina. "Mrs. Moretti, glad you're still with us." "Barely," she quipped, stepping into the armored car. The drive to the city was tense. Dominic was on the phone the entire time, speaking in rapid-fire Italian and coded English. Serafina watched the skyline of Chicago approach, the Willis Tower, the Hancock. It looked like a fortress of steel and glass. They didn't go to a house in the suburbs. They went to the Spire, Dominic's penthouse, atop a 50-story luxury high-rise in the Gold Coast. The elevator opened directly into the apartment. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, floor-to-ceiling windows, black marble floors, minimalist furniture. It was cold, masculine, and imposing. "This is home?" Serafina asked, her voice echoing in the vast space. "This is the command center," Dominic corrected. He walked to the bar and poured 2 stiff whiskies. "The house in Lake Forest is compromised until we clear the rats. We stay here." He handed her a glass. "Drink. You're going to need it." "Why?" "Because," Dominic said, turning to face the elevator as the doors opened again. "We have a guest." Serafina turned. A man walked in, flanked by 2 of Dominic's guards. He looked disheveled, sweating, his expensive suit rumpled. It was her cousin, Stefano. "Serafina!" Stefano gasped, his eyes wide with terror. "Thank God! Tell him, Sarah! Tell him I'm family!" Serafina froze. "Stefano, what is he doing here?" Dominic walked over to Stefano, circling him like a wolf. "Tell her, Stefano. Tell Mrs. Moretti why my men found you trying to board a flight to Rio de Janeiro with a bag full of cash." Stefano trembled. "I was just taking a vacation." "Liar," Dominic said, calmly. He lashed out, backhanding Stefano across the face. The sound cracked like a whip. Stefano fell to his knees, blood trickling from his lip. "Dominic!" Serafina shouted, stepping forward. "Stay back!" Dominic barked, pointing a finger at her. "He sold the route. He gave the Russians the flight plan." Serafina stared at her cousin, the boy she had grown up playing tag with in her father's garden. "Stefano, is it true?" "They threatened me, Sarah," Stefano sobbed. "They said they'd kill me. I had debts, gambling debts. They said if I just gave them the time, they would wipe the slate clean." "So you sold my life for a gambling debt?" Serafina whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't think they'd kill you," Stefano pleaded. "Just him. Just Moretti. You were supposed to be safe." "You idiot," Dominic snarled. "A bomb doesn't discriminate." Dominic pulled his gun. He racked the slide. "Dominic, no," Serafina said. "He betrayed us. The penalty is death. You know the rules." "Not in my living room," Serafina said, her voice finding a sudden, steely strength. "And not by you." Dominic looked at her, his eyes blazing. "You want to save him?" "No," Serafina said, walking over to the bar. She picked up the gun she had cleaned on the plane. She checked the safety. "I want to handle family business myself." Dominic lowered his weapon slightly, intrigue flickering in his gaze. "Serafina." She walked up to Stefano. He looked up at her, hope in his eyes. "Sarah, please. Remember when we were kids? Uncle Carlo will pay him back. Just let me go." "Uncle Carlo?" Serafina asked softly. "Does my father know?" Stefano hesitated. His eyes darted to the left. That split-second hesitation told her everything. "Does my father?" "No," she repeated, aiming the gun at his knee. "He told me to do it," Stefano whispered, the confession hanging in the room like toxic gas. Serafina felt her world shatter. Her father. The man who walked her down the aisle. The man who told Dominic to take care of her. "Why?" she asked, a tear leaking from her eye. "Because, with Moretti dead, the marriage is void, but the dowry is paid, and he gets you back. He gets to sell you again to the highest bidder in New York. He needs the money, Sarah. The family is broke." Serafina stared at him. The betrayal was absolute. She wasn't a daughter to Carlo Russo. She was a recurring revenue stream. She looked at Dominic. He wasn't moving. He was waiting to see what she would do. He was testing her again. But this time, the test wasn't about loyalty to him. It was about defining who she was. Serafina looked back at Stefano. "You shouldn't have missed," she said coldly. She shifted her aim and fired. The bullet didn't kill him. She hit him in the shoulder, burying him into the carpet with a scream of agony. "Get him out of here," she ordered the guards, her voice ringing with authority. "Lock him in the holding cell. He doesn't die yet. He's going to be the bait for my father." The guards looked at Dominic. Dominic nodded slowly, a dark smirk playing on his lips. As they dragged the screaming Stefano away, Dominic holstered his weapon and walked to Serafina. She was shaking now, the adrenaline crashing. He took the gun from her hand, set it on the table and pulled her into his arms. "You did good, Tesoro," he whispered into her hair. "You did good." "My father tried to kill you," she sobbed into his chest. "He tried to kill us." "And for that," Dominic promised, his voice a low rumble of vengeance, "I will burn his world to the ground. But we do it together." 3 days after the incident with Stefano, the atmosphere in the Moretti penthouse was suffocatingly tense. Dominic had gone into full war mode. He had called in favors from the outfit's old guard, mobilizing soldiers from the south side to the north shore. Maps of New Jersey and New York were spread across the dining table, marked with red X's. Serafina, however, was fighting a different battle. She was fighting the ghost of her past. She sat on the white leather sofa, staring at her phone. Her father had called 5 times. She hadn't answered. "He knows Stefano failed," Dominic said, walking into the room. He was wearing a tactical vest over a black t-shirt. He looked like a soldier ready for the trenches. "He doesn't know why he failed," Serafina corrected. "He probably thinks Stefano just got caught or ran off with the money. He doesn't know Stefano talked." "He will suspect." "Suspecting isn't knowing. Carlo Russo is a coward, Dominic. He operates on certainty. If he's uncertain, he'll freeze." "I'm not waiting for him to freeze. We strike tonight." "Tonight?" Serafina stood up. "Strike where?" "He's in Chicago," Dominic revealed. "He flew in this morning, ostensibly to visit his beloved daughter and check on her safety after the terrible news of the attack in Italy. He's at the Four Seasons." "He's here?" Serafina felt bile rise in her throat. "He has the nerve to come here. He thinks he's untouchable because he's your father. He thinks I won't touch him because of the old codes. Honor thy father-in-law." Dominic spat on the floor. "He forgot the other code. Death to traitors." "I'm coming with you." "No." "Dominic, look at me." She walked up to him, grabbing the straps of his tactical vest. "He is my father. This is my burden. If you kill him without me looking him in the eye, I will never forgive you. I need closure. I need him to know that I know." Dominic searched her face. He saw the grief, but he also saw the resolve. The girl in the white dress was dead. The woman standing before him was forged in fire. "Fine," he relented. "But you wear a vest, and you stay behind me." The suite at the Four Seasons was opulent, overlooking the lake. Carlo Russo sat in a velvet armchair, sipping brandy, looking every bit the grieving patriarch. When the door burst open, kicked in by Enzo, Carlo spilled his drink. Dominic strode in, flanked by 2 guards. Serafina walked in last. "Dominic, what is the meaning of this?" Carlo blustered, standing up. "I come to check on my daughter and you break down my door?" "Cut the act, Carlo," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "We have Stefano." Carlo's face went grey. "Stefano? That boy is a troublemaker. Whatever he said you paid for the hit." Serafina spoke up, stepping out from behind Dominic. Carlo looked at her. "Serafina, my sweet girl, you're hysterical. The stress, it's making you imagine things." "I'm not imagining the ledger we found on Stefano's encrypted drive," Dominic lied smoothly. "The transfer of funds to the Bratva accounts. It's over, Carlo." Carlo slumped back into the chair. The mask fell. The loving father vanished, replaced by the desperate, greedy man he truly was. It was business, Sarah, Carlo wheezed. Strictly business. The Morettis? They are animals. I couldn't let you stay with him forever. I was going to liberate you. Liberate me? Serafina laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. By blowing me up in an Alfa Romeo. You weren't supposed to be in the car, Carlo shouted. You were supposed to be shopping. Dominic was supposed to be alone. It was a mistake. A mistake, Dominic repeated. He placed his gun on the table. You know, Carlo, in my world, mistakes are expensive. I can pay, Carlo stammered. I have territory in Newark, the ports. I don't want your ports, Dominic said. I want your life. Dominic raised the gun. Wait, Serafina said. Dominic paused. Sarah, don't. I said wait. She walked toward her father. Carlo looked up at her, hope rekindling in his watery eyes. Sarah, please, I'm your papa. I raised you. Since your mother died, I did everything for you. You did everything for yourself, she said softly. You sold me to save your empire. And when that wasn't enough, you tried to kill my husband, to resell me. You aren't a father. You're a pimp. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a document. What is this? Carlo asked. A transfer of power, Serafina said. You are going to sign over the entirety of the Russo family assets, the shipping lanes, the unions, the real estate, to Dominic Moretti. Everything. You will be left with nothing but the suit on your back. I can't do that. The commission won't allow it. The commission doesn't know you tried to kill a Don, Dominic interjected. If they find out, they won't just kill you, Carlo. They will torture you for days. This is mercy. Carlo looked between them. He saw the united front, the wall of ice, and the fire. He realized he had lost. With a shaking hand, he signed the papers. Good, Dominic said, snatching the papers. Now get out of my city. If I see you in Chicago, or New York, or anywhere on the East Coast. I pulled the trigger. Carlo scrambled to the door. He looked back at Serafina one last time. You're making a mistake, girl. He's a killer. He'll turn on you one day. Maybe, Serafina said, leaning into Dominic's side. But he's my killer. Carlo fled. Silence descended on the room. Dominic looked at the papers, then at Serafina. You let him live, Dominic said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. Death is too easy for him, Serafina replied. He loves money and power more than life. I took both. Now he has to live as a nobody. That is his hell. Dominic smiled, a genuine, dangerous smile. Remind me never to cross you, Mrs. Moretti. You'd be wise to remember that. He pulled her close. We own the East Coast now. The alliance is absolute. But we have a problem. What? The Bratva. They're still out there. They took the money, they failed the hit, and now they know we're coming for them. The war isn't over, Sarah. It's just scaling up. I know, Serafina said, resting her head on his chest. But I'm not afraid anymore. No. No. She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. Because I realized something during the drive here. What's that? I'm not the peace treaty, Dominic. I never was. What are you then? I'm the ammunition. Dominic kissed her hard, sealing the new pact. They were no longer just husband and wife. They were king and queen of an empire built on blood, and they were ready to burn the rest of the world down if anyone dared to touch what was theirs. But as they kissed, Dominic's phone buzzed in his pocket. A single text message. He pulled away to check it. His face went pale. What is it? Serafina asked, sensing the shift in his energy. Dominic showed her the screen. It was a photo, a grainy surveillance-style photo taken from across the street of the Four Seasons, just minutes ago. It showed Carlo Russo getting into a car. But he wasn't alone. Sitting in the driver's seat of the getaway car was a man Serafina recognized instantly. A man who had been dead for 3 years. "Is that?" she whispered, her blood running cold. "My brother," Dominic hissed. "Luca! He's supposed to be in a grave." The twist was a knife to the gut. Carlo hadn't been working alone. He had been working with the ghost of Dominic's past, a brother who had supposedly died in a turf war, now back to reclaim the throne. "The war isn't scaling up," Dominic said, racking the slide of his gun again. "It's a civil war, and it's just begun." The revelation that Luca Moretti was alive didn't just shift the board, it set the board on fire. For 3 years, Dominic had mourned his brother, believing him dead in a boat explosion. In reality, Luca had been watching from the shadows, waiting for Dominic to do the hard work, securing the Russo alliance, so he could return to steal a stabilized empire. "He wants the throne," Dominic said, staring out at the rain-lashed Chicago skyline. "And he wants you. He thinks I've gone soft." The phone rang. It was Luca. "Hello, fratello," the voice purred. "Come to the shipyards. Dock 4, alone. If you bring your army, I burn the city. If you don't show, I send the Russians to collect your wife." Dominic hung up, his face set in stone. "Enzo, get the car." "I'm coming with you," Serafina announced, pulling a heavy trench coat over her dress. "Absolutely not," Dominic snapped. "This is a kill box." "He expects you to protect me by leaving me behind," she countered, her eyes fierce. "He thinks I'm the weakness, but I am the variable he hasn't calculated. I am the distraction, Dominic. Use me." Dominic saw the resolve in her eyes, the same fire that had saved them in Italy. He nodded. "Let's finish this." The Chicago shipyards were a graveyard of rusted metal and freezing fog. Dominic's car stopped under a flickering halogen light. He stepped out, hands raised. Serafina stepped out beside him, looking small but steady in the oversized coat. 20 yards away, Luca Moretti stood flanked by 4 mercenaries and a terrifyingly smug Carlo Russo. "I told you to come alone, Dom," Luca laughed, a jagged scar twisting his smile. "But I see you brought a parting gift. I need an heir, and she'll do nicely." "Let them go, Luca," Dominic growled. "This is between us." "Kneel," Luca commanded, raising a detonator. "I have snipers on the cranes. You move, her head disappears. Kneel and beg." Dominic froze. He couldn't see the snipers, but he couldn't risk it. He looked at Serafina. She gave a microscopic nod. "I kneel to no man," Dominic said. "Kill him," Luca ordered the mercenaries. "No!" Serafina screamed. She dropped to the ground, pulling a flashbang grenade from her pocket and rolling it forward. Bang! A blinding white light ripped through the darkness. The mercenaries, blinded by their night vision goggles, screamed. Dominic moved instantly. He drew his hidden pistol, dropping 2 men with double taps to the chest. Serafina scrambled behind a bollard, firing her own weapon to suppress the remaining guards. "There are no snipers, Dominic. He's a narcissist. He wanted to do it himself." Realizing she was right, Dominic sprinted across the wet concrete. He vaulted a crate and tackled his brother. They crashed into the mud. Luca fought dirty, gouging at Dominic's eyes. "Father always loved you more. You were the soldier. I was the spare." Dominic slammed a loose pipe into Luca's temple, knocking him back. He stood over his brother, chest heaving, gun raised. Luca laughed, blood streaming down his face. "Do it. Show me you're a monster. Kill your own blood." Dominic wavered. This was the boy he had taught to ride a bike. "He won't stop, Dominic," Serafina shouted, stepping out from cover, her gun trained on Luca. "If you let him live, he comes back. He'll kill me. He'll kill our children." "Our children." The words hung in the freezing air. Dominic looked at Luca's hateful eyes and realized the truth. The brother he loved died 3 years ago. This was just a threat to his family. "This marriage means nothing if I can't protect it," Dominic whispered. He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the lake. Luca fell back, the threat extinguished. Silence returned to the docks. Dominic stood motionless until Serafina wrapped her arms around him from behind, anchoring him. He turned, burying his face in her neck. "It's over," he said, looking at the cowering Carlo Russo, who knew his fate was sealed. "Now, we rule." 6 months later, the charity gala at the Art Institute was the event of the season. Dominic stood on the balcony, watching the city he now ruled with absolute authority. Serafina stepped up beside him, wearing emerald velvet, her hand resting subconsciously on the visible bump of her stomach. "Brooding?" she teased. "Calculating?" Dominic smiled, pulling her close. "I used to think you were a liability. I calculated the risk of this marriage every day. And now? Now I realize I was bad at math," he whispered, kissing her temple. "You weren't a variable, Serafina. You were the answer." The camera flashed below, capturing the King and Queen of Chicago. The marriage that started as a cold contract had become a dynasty forged in fire. And for the first time in his life, the Mafia boss was perfectly happy to lose control. And that is how a business deal turned into a blood oath. Dominic and Serafina proved that in the underworld, the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's a partner you can trust with your life. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel and tells me you want more Mafia romance dramas. Do you think Dominic did the right thing killing his brother? Let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss next week's story about a bodyguard who falls for the senator's daughter. You won't want to miss the twist in that one. Thanks for watching. And until next time, keep your secrets safe and your romance dangerous.